Well, welcome everybody to another episode here of the Quantum Action Podcast. We're with Joe Jordan, who's a UFO investigator, author of a number of books. It's going to give us his take on the UFO thing, which is very different to the take that we've had with other guests talking about this subject. So I thought we'd bring a totally different perspective to the whole UFO phenomenon today by talking to Joe, which has a very interesting story. So Joe, tell us a bit about yourself, what you were doing professionally, and how you got into the UFO investigation thing.
Well, first off, thanks for having me on. And this is an interesting story in itself on how I got into this. It started back in 1992, kind of accidentally. I had no interest in UFOs at all. I didn't even think about the subject. It wasn't something I followed in the news at the time. Pretty much I thought it was just, hokey science fiction. Now, don't get me wrong. I love science fiction. I started out as in high school, avid science fiction reader. But I knew what science fiction was. Science fiction was escapism, from our daily grind. It was like any fiction story, a good fiction story that you pick up. We pick it up because we want to be able to escape from the craziness of our world today, and we can escape into the story that the author prepares for us. And to me, it was the ability to escape into a good story about, life somewhere else in the universe with far superior beings and technology. I really liked that when I was younger. And it was in 1992 as I was headed on a vacation trip to visit my brother in Alaska when I picked up a book at the Orlando, Florida here, International Airport I was leaving out of at the kiosk to pass the time. And just one simple book I was looking for, just to take up that long 10 hours to get me to Alaska. 'Cause back then we didn't have the technology, to pass the time on an airplane like we do now. And I'm browsing through the kiosk, and I decided to go check the magazines. Couldn't find anything I liked. Went in and looked at some of the paperbacks that were on sale, and I got one that caught my attention. I picked the book up. To me, it looked like a science fiction book. But I turned it around and I read it, the synopsis on the back, and it was telling me that it was scientific research investigation into a flying disc that landed in New Mexico in 1947. And I thought, nah, this is science fiction. But it says it wasn't. And, I just had to figure out what they were talking about. This is that book, by the way, UFO Crash at Roswell.
Yeah.
That's the one that took me down the rabbit hole of ufology. I read the book on vacation. It just brought 1,000 questions up in my mind that I had to find answers to. This was something that was blurring that line of reality for me. And I knew where that dark line of reality and fantasy was, and I didn't understand how they could be blurred in this manner. So that's what caught the interest for me in the book. Wanted me to find out more about it. And I went into the book, I finished it, and then I was on the quest to find those answers to those questions that I had from reading the book. And I happened to become in contact with a gentleman in Orlando who was with the Mutual UFO Network. And working with him, he introduced me to MUFON.
Just to interrupt you a little bit. So what were you, at the time,
Sure.
What were you doing professionally?
Professionally, I was a worker at one of the leading boat companies in the world, manufacturing of boats, pleasure boats, big ones. And I'd been there, close to 20 years at the time.
Okay.
And I was just an everyday worker. I had a son. My whole focus in life was to support my son, enjoy the weekends. I had no focus on God, on UFOs or anything like that. I was a pretty busy guy, and I enjoyed life to the fullest at that time. And this one came in and interrupted all of that. As I started working with this gentleman in Orlando, he introduced me to the Mutual UFO Network, which is the largest grassroots organization, not-for-profit, in the world even today, that scientifically investigates UFOs. And as I asked him questions, and he had the wealth of answers for me because he'd been into this study for some time, it just piqued my interest even more. And he introduced me to how I could become an investigator, field investigator for MUFON, and actually do the research myself and follow up on sighting investigations that came across for MUFON. And even after that, he told me that, there's no chapter for MUFON over in your county. And he was actually the head of the chapter there in Orange County, there in Central Florida. And I lived over on the Space Coast where Kennedy Space Center is. And he says, there's no chapter over there. You might consider starting your own chapter, train up field investigators under you, and take over in your area if you're really as interested as you seem to be. And I was. And I ended up following through with that. And with his help, I ended up becoming the state section director for MUFON in Brevard County, Florida. Again, where the Kennedy Space Center is located. Of course, nothing happens here, right? We had some very interesting sightings. Even though this is probably one of the most guarded airspaces in the world, people were reporting a lot of activity that we followed up on over the years. One of the things that I was responsible for as a state section director was holding monthly meetings, for the public to be able to educate them on what MUFON was doing, and also to kind of drive up membership in MUFON, because it was the membership in MUFON that was helping fund the research that MUFON was trying to do. Like I said, it's a grassroots organization and it's not for profit. So it takes contributors and people that donate to help pay for the expensive research that might have to be done at universities or scientific laboratories as they go into their really in-depth work. So it was during these meetings that I came across another part of the phenomenon that I wasn't expecting to come across, but it was there. When I started holding these monthly meetings, it was at a public library, and I don't charge for the meetings. We're not supposed to. And when you put a shingle up on a door, a sign that says, UFO meeting, public welcome, you have no idea what you're going to get coming in there for those meetings. And I really didn't even think about that. But as people came in, they were either curious or they had a story to tell, or maybe they were both. What I didn't expect was the people coming in there that were looking for help. And these were the people that were part of the phenomenon called the alien abduction or contact part of the phenomenon. And these people I recognized as they weren't happy people. Their lives had been turned upside down by an experience that they had no control over. And this was the beginning of where my research ended up getting very in-depth, is through the alien abduction experience.
Just recently, Joe, we had Eleanor Danan on the show, and she claims to be abducted, had been abducted by the grey aliens while she was growing up. And that was a traumatic experience for her. So that was an interesting story to hear. So, we've had somebody on this show that's had that kind of experience. Continue, please.
Well, as we and my field investigators that I trained up, myself and them, as we, continued our work and listened to the stories that were coming into the meeting, the more I listened to these experiencers from contact or abductions, the more I started to believe that if we were going to get to real answers on this phenomenon, it was going to be working closer with these people than following up on sighting reports. Because if you think about it, it's one thing to see lights in a sky, but it's a whole other thing to be sitting in front of somebody who's actually had contact with the beings that are supposedly piloting the lights in the sky. So I felt that this is where the answers were truly going to come from, is in the realm of the abductions and contactees.
Being a pilot myself, I have a trained eye to flying objects, and most of the time when a UFO is reported, it's the person that's seeing it that doesn't know what they're looking at because they haven't got a trained eye for flying objects. And so 90% of the time, by asking them the right questions, you can immediately identify it was a satellite, it was Venus, it was a plane. And then those times that you struggle to identify what it was, it's probably some experimental aircraft. So now you're narrowing it that are really unidentified or off-world objects.
Sure. And that brings up a very good point that I'll allude to right now, is the statistics with MUFON. When they talk about the sightings reports that they've gotten over the years, and they've been around since 1969, so they're into hundreds and hundreds of thousands of sighting reports that they've gotten in over the years. They will tell you that up to 98% or more of sighting reports that come in and are investigated are either classified as misidentified man-made phenomenon or natural phenomenon. Misidentified. And that's following exactly what you're saying. And as far as investigations go, as field investigators,
in my own investigations, I found the same number.
Sure. And when we did investigations with UFO investigations, when we followed up with them, when you ask those right questions that you were talking about, when you really start asking the right questions that they didn't ask because they didn't know to ask because they weren't trained, pilots like yourself, then we come to find out that you get them actually reliving what they saw and looking at it in a better perspective because you're aiding them with that information. Then they understand that maybe this wasn't something that I thought it was. So just wanted to bring that up so people understand.
No, that's
now with the
sense. I mean, I personally have always been fascinated with the people that claim to have met with these people from another planet, and what did these people from another planet have to say? Why were they here, and what was their intention, kind of thing. That's always been
right.
Because I've always, and I still am today. I still believe that there is life on other planets, whether they've come here or not, or they are here, or they come and go. I don't know. I've never met any. Or at least I don't know if I've met any. But, I've always been fascinated by that aspect, so I can understand why you were drawn in that direction.
Sure. And the first thing we realized, being that these people were not happy people, and a lot of them seemed to be suffering from symptoms similar to PTSD from the experience being so traumatic to them, we needed to be very careful. And as we started into the research, I talked to my investigators that were working with me, and I said, we need to educate ourselves as much as possible with the research that's available at this time. And this was back in the mid-90s, from the leading researchers in the world, and gain as much information and knowledge on the subject matter as we can, so we wouldn't cause any more harm to these people as we worked with them. And we took the time and we did that. And then we started into becoming, familiar with them so that we could try to get their stories from them. And we started recording the stories, with VHS back then. And what we were looking for is anything that would open that door to understanding more of what this topic was about. We were looking for the same things that the rest of the leading researchers were. What causes this experience? What's the commonality between experiencers? And even the question of, is there any help for these experiencers? Could the experiences be stopped? It's the same questions the leading researchers were asked when we started into this. And I spent a number of years working in this area with them, and there was one thing that I did recognize amongst them that was a commonality. And it kind of puzzled me in the beginning because I didn't understand what I was seeing here. But there seemed to be an area that they had connected to that was, I guess they figured it was an area that would help them in some way, because there was really no help for them out there besides them coming together in venues that may be like group therapy where they would sit and talk with other experiencers like themselves. But that's not really help, you know. It gets you to understand that you're not alone in this, which may be a little bit of help. But if you can't stop this experience and you're still living with it in fear, not knowing when it's going to happen again, because it's a life pattern once once you recognize you're dealing with it. So we had to try to understand what this was that they were connecting to that they thought was help. And as I started looking into it and trying to understand it, I saw that what they had latched onto for an area of what they thought would be help was the New Age metaphysical realm and the people that were involved with it. And I started seeing a lot of different crazy things out there that they were offering these people, and usually at a high cost, to try and help them in some ways. And the more I delve into that, the more I realized it was a type of spiritual connection that they were looking for and they were connecting to with this New Age metaphysical realm. Because it was a type of pseudo-spirituality, the whole realm was. The crazy thing about it is the more I involved myself in it and studied it, the more I actually became part of it. And I spent about 4 years actually participating, involving myself, and becoming a New Age practitioner, which was something that was totally unexpected as I got into this. And I tried to understand what I was seeing here with these people.
Yeah, but Joe, I mean, and
it was very difficult.
Yeah, when you look at these stories, I mean, there's those that have been abducted by the Greys that tend to take you from your room at night and take you to a station, do experiments and put probes in you and that. And then there's those that have an experience like the Valiant Thor story, where this person looked like you and spent time at the Pentagon. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. So there's different types of beings. Some of them are benevolent, didn't do anything bad to the people, and then you got the ones that did all the bad stuff. But you got these two sort of groups, and others in between as well. So did you sort of investigate all those types?
Yes, and there's a third type. There's the one that has both. That starts out with bad experiences from the Greys or reptilians, and then somewhere along the line, a higher spiritual type entity comes in and comforts them and tells them that they've been chosen, they had a purpose to go through this, and they're there to help them. It's what we started calling the good cop, bad cop of the alien phenomenon. Because what we realized in the end run was they're both the same. The whole idea was conditioning and getting them to form an allegiance with these beings.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, being that I was looking at this from another perspective, you have to realize when I first started into this, I was an agnostic humanist. Science was my Bible. Everything you had to show me evidence. As I moved into the New Age metaphysical realm and made a spiritual connection, it allowed me to view this phenomenon from a separate, distinct perspective than what I started with. Okay. So now I've had an opportunity to look at this phenomenon from two different perspectives, which most researchers don't have. They come at it from the first perspective that they start into it and they stay with that. But I still wasn't getting answers looking at it from this second perspective. And in the fall of 1996, working with a fellow investigator that I was working with, a female at the time, she was a professing Christian. I wasn't. I was a crystal rolling New Ager. Okay. And she introduced me to something that she thought would be helpful to me. She said, I really think you need better, support and help in this field that you're working in. I think there's something very sinister, very deceptive about it. And she says, as a Christian, I think it's very evil. Okay. but she was also helping us do investigations. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And she says, I think you should look at this as help for what your protection from what you're dealing with. And she showed me the Bible, and I said, no, that's not something that I think is connected to all of this. But she ended up catching me on that, and she said, you say you're the most open-minded, objective researcher that there is. And I said, yeah, I like to say that. I like to believe that. Yeah. She says, oh, so you'll take a look at this. And I said, all right, let's take a look at it. Show me what you got. Okay. And what was interesting at that moment in time, not believing in the Bible and God and all of that, but I grew up in the church with my parents, my family, but I turned away from it in high school. And when she read this gospel message out of the Bible, it was like I'd never heard it this way before. And it made such an impact on me at that time. I said, I want that protection. And in 1996, in November, I became a Christian myself. Gave my life to Jesus Christ. And now I'm asking, what's a Christian? What am I now? Because I've been other things. I was an agnostic humanist. I was a New Ager. But now I'm a Christian, but I'm a new Christian. I don't fully understand what it is to be a Christian.
So what kind of Christian denomination did you join? Because I know in America there's 155 different forms of Christianity.
It was a Protestant. It was Protestant, not Catholic.
Okay, yeah.
I wasn't part of any actual denomination. I came in as a believer in what God's Word said. I wasn't following a denomination of any sort. Okay. Because I felt that denominations that's where man gets involved and wants to change a little thing about God's Word, and it becomes a denomination. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to follow strictly what God's Word said.
So you never went and investigated?
Without man getting in there and mucking it up.
So you never went and met with, I don't know...
Say again?
You never went and met with Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormon missionaries or anything like that? You just thought, okay, I'm going to embrace Christianity.
I talked to them.
Yeah.
I talked to them later,
okay,
but I did not get involved with any of that. Okay. It was strictly Protestant.
So just Bible, Protestant.
Okay. Sure. And, I talked to my lead investigator in my studies, and he happened to be a Christian too. And I mentioned to him, I said, I'd like to know more about Christianity. And he says, well, I've got this great Bible study program that my friend has, and maybe we could go through it together. Okay. And that was something we went into quite fast. Yeah. And it was able to give me a good background and understanding of what the Bible was about and what God had to say for us. Mm-hmm. So I was building that foundation to be able to come at this same research that I was doing, but now from a new perspective. Yeah. And that perspective was as a Christian. So now I've had an opportunity to look at this phenomenon from 3 different perspectives, mm-hmm, asking the same questions, doing the same study, doing the same research. Yeah. And this was at the time that we founded CE4 Research Group, okay, which is what I work with, have been for the past 20 years, 20-some years. And the reason we founded CE4 Research Group is because MUFON at the time was not set up to investigate abduction experiences. They were based on the scientific investigation of UFOs. So even though we were MUFON members, I could not do the research under the auspice of MUFON. So we decided to set up a separate entity in itself, and that became CE4 Research Group. And we agreed to make all of our work open in public for peer review, so that if MUFON wanted to look at the information, it would be there for them. And ever since we started, we've always made our work public, our findings public. And over the years, I've had an opportunity to share the findings with 5 different international directors of MUFON, which, after talking to them, they agreed that I did the work properly. Mm-hmm. It's just that it wasn't something that they could, support, because it's not what MUFON is about. Yeah. but they were quite fascinated with the findings that we came up with over the past 20-some years. As we started into this now, we decided to put our own hypothesis out there for the research. And being a new Christian, I thought, what better question to ask than, are Christians being abducted by aliens? And I thought this would be a simple project that we would get answers to real quick, and we'd move on to something more complicated. Little did I realize it wasn't going to be that way. We came back with two answers to the question. It was yes and
let me
no.
ask you this. Up until then, and obviously you'd had a lot of experience speaking to people, did you think that these people were actually meeting with people from another planet? Or were you still skeptical?
No. I believe that the experiences were absolutely real.
So you thought, yeah, these are beings from another planet.
The source of them at the time, yes, it looked to be extraterrestrial to me.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't know of anything else that it could be.
Yeah, makes sense.
You know, that it wasn't in that perspective yet.
Okay.
It wasn't until I became a Christian that another option became available.
Okay.
And that's when the option of spiritual beings became available, because it wasn't something in my vocabulary until I got to becoming a Christian.
Okay.
You know, scientists don't believe in the spirit realm. The New Agers believed in a type of entity, but they didn't use the word spiritual entities. You know, they were using interdimensional or etheric, or they even had, the ascended masters they referred to.
Like Shirley MacLaine.
But it wasn't until...
You're familiar with the Shirley MacLaine story?
Yes, like Shirley MacLaine. Oh, yeah. But coming at it from a Christian perspective, now I'm opened up to the heavenly host that God created before humanity. And then understanding through God's Word and the whole story that the Bible follows through is that there's been a war over the souls of humanity between God's good hosts, the angels, and the demonic fallen hosts of fallen angels. And this is something that's been going on, from the beginning of time, from creation. And that's when I realized that maybe there's something else going on here. There's another option that these entities could be. But it was still a lot of years before I could get a finger on that. And even the language in the UFO community was still talking extraterrestrial. It wasn't until about 2008 that the terminology started to change. I started to see another term used that was new to the field. And I had the opportunity to be the director of the Roswell UFO Festival Conference in 2008 for the city of Roswell. And when I was planning the conference, prior to it, I was looking at the speakers that I would bring in there, and I chose what I felt were the best of the time to bring in for this conference. I had no idea what they were going to be talking about. I just thought, these guys I need to bring for headliners, to get people to come to this, to help the city in their festival. Little did I know that they were all going to be talking about something that was common amongst each other, but it was still new to the community. And that was the idea that maybe we could be dealing with something else than ET. And they were throwing terms around like interdimensional, ultradimensional, and something that was coming in from another realm, not this physical realm. And this was a whole new concept. And it made me start rethinking what I was reading in biblical scripture. Well, they're talking about the same thing that Christians talk about, but we call it the spirit realm. And we call it spiritual beings, the heavenly host, otherwise angels. And then I started putting it together and seeing that the activities, the messages that were coming between experiencers that were getting communication, everything was lining up to show that what we thought was beings from other worlds was not that at all. What we were seeing here is that we were dealing with a major deception upon humanity. And that's something we had to look at more in depth, because it wasn't making sense otherwise from the perspective that I had looked at it. The only thing that was lining up with is these things are mirroring angels. These things are mirroring the stories of angelic visitation that had been happening for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
In your book, you talk about,
and that's something we had to look at.
in your book you mentioned that these people that are being abducted and from their bedrooms taken to these spaceships, the grey aliens doing experiments on them, and that these Christians would suddenly mention Jesus Christ and the vision would completely disappear and they'd be back in their bedrooms. And that was proof that, this was, as you just said, it was a spiritual thing that was happening. It wasn't some spaceship came over their house, beamed them up, like Star Trek mode, and started experimenting on them. It was these demons that were creating this illusion that they were from another planet when they weren't. They were coming in from another dimension through a portal. As we see in a lot of these Marvel movies, these portals open and people come through. It seems to be the new trend in Hollywood right now, these portals and these interdimension and multiple realities and double gangers and all that kind of thing. They seem to be throwing at us today through our TVs, instead of this spaceships landing and the grey aliens or the green little men coming out. So you saw a number of Christians that were saying that, as they mentioned Jesus Christ when they were having these abductions, the whole abduction thing would suddenly vanish like that. How many of these cases did you see? Did you see a lot of these cases like
that? I've worked with over 600 cases over the past 20-some years that have come forward and actually willing to share their testimonies of what they experience. Keep in mind, it's until recent time that people are starting to come out and starting to talk more, because it's becoming a little more acceptable in society to talk about this experience. 20 years ago, people did not want to talk about it. Keeping in mind they've already had their lives turned upside down. They've lost family, they've lost friends, they've lost their jobs, they've lost their credibility. It's not a good thing to say, hey, I've been abducted by aliens. The one thing that I had to try and get people to understand is, why do I believe this is not a physical taken to a spaceship experience? And it was working with a peer researcher of mine, Gary Bates. He wrote Alien Intrusion, UFOs and the End Time Deception, or Alien Intrusion and the Evolution Connection, the name of his book. And he started seeing a similarity listening to these experiencers as we interviewed them to people that had been through, I guess you call it stage hypnosis, where people are invited up on a stage show, and they're put under a hypnotic suggestion, and they do crazy things, and then they remember it. What they remember afterward was very similar to what we were seeing from experiencers. So I started looking at that a little deeper, and this is where I was able to, to get people to understand that why I was seeing this is not a physical experience. And what I was finding, going back and talking to these people again about their experiences, but not just listening to them tell me the story, but as they went through the story, I would stop them and ask them, what do you see to your left? What do you see to your right? What does the temperature feel like? What does the surface feel like when they touch it or they're standing? And there was a lot of information that they couldn't answer. Well, if you think about this, if I was to take you to ask you about your last birthday, you would remember your last birthday. You would remember the things that were most important to you, okay? But you probably couldn't remember the whole day. Well, the way I work with people is very similar to the way I work in my profession, because I'm a safety professional on my job. And I do a lot of incident investigation where I have to take people back and ask questions to get to a root cause of the incident so it doesn't happen again, so I can put in corrective action so it doesn't happen again. So I learned to be able to ask people the next question that take them to the next answer, the next answer, next answer. So if I do the same thing with your birthday, I can get you to remember those things that you did not put as fully important in your consciousness, and I can take you back to help you relive that whole day. But with these people in their experience, when I tried that process, there were gaps. There was information that was not there. And you know, I wasn't the only one seeing that. Leading researchers in the field that use hypnotic regression, which I don't, were finding the same problem. They were saying that there was missing parts of the memory, but they were saying that they believed it was a block that the entities put on the experiencer so they could not remember the experience. And I realized that's not what's happening here. What's happening is they were never given the information. If they were, it would be there. Okay? And I started realizing that what we were seeing here is very similar to a play. If you go to see a play and you're in the audience and you've seen a scene already in the play and they're getting ready to change the scene. So you wait while they change the set, and all of a sudden you see them put up two walls, one with a door, one with a window and a picture, and then a couch gets brought on stage and a chair and a table with a lamp on it. So first thing comes to your mind, what are you seeing here? You're seeing a living room setting. But if you think about it, is it what your living room looks like? I doubt it. Most likely you have a lot more detail. But when they do a play, they don't need a lot of detail. All they have to do is give you enough sensational objects to make the setting recognized by your brain to be say, oh, that's a living room setting. And what I've found is that's what's happening with these experiences. These entities are giving a visionary experience during the sleep state that is very sensational, very impacting, but very limited on the information. Only enough that they need to remember to believe what happened to them is real. Best example I can explain for your listeners is take the first movie, The Matrix. When Neo goes to the submarine for the first time and they lay him on that table or a reclined chair or table, whatever it was, and they plug him into the back of his head, where does he go? He goes to this white space, and it's just him in this all white space. And then what starts showing up? A couch, a chair, a table with a lamp on it. We're back to the furniture again. And then Neo shows up, or Morpheus shows up. Okay? Where's Neo? He's still on that bed. This is your abduction experience. This is how this works. So once we realized that this is what we were dealing with, that none of this was real, it was all a delusion, that changed our game. That changed our understanding of what this was. So in this third perspective, I was able to gain information to get a better understanding of what the experience is about. So the question is, if this is all like a play, who's the playwright? That's what we needed to get to. So when you combine how this is done and the information that's been given to these people through a lot of the communication, which is always anti-God, anti-Christ, anti-Bible, anti-creation, and they're our creators, and they're coming back to visit us and check on us, all of this lines up with this being a deceptive, spiritually demonic, visionary experience. And you couple that with the ability to be able to terminate the experience while it's happening through the name and authority of Jesus Christ, and terminate it as a life experience because you've developed a relationship with that Jesus Christ, this gives us a whole different meaning about what this phenomenon's about. Also including that everybody that gets involved in this phenomenon, the outcome is identical. It takes their eyes away from the one true God of the Bible.
Yeah, because they see these aliens as gods, as the creators of our planet. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, and that's something they want to be part of.
So let's just sort of
now the scary part.
Move on to something parallel here.
Okay.
Now, when we look at the works of, I don't know if you're familiar with Mauro Biglino, the Italian scholar that's translated the Bible from Hebrew into Italian and English and that, and the findings that he's found in the errors of the translating of the Bible, and seeing that seems to be evidence of some form of other race interfering with us. When you look at programs like Ancient Aliens or the works of Graham Hancock or Michael Tellinger, where they discover all these artifacts and who really built the pyramids and whatever. What do you say to all that seems to be uncovering these days? That kind of is telling us that our official history didn't go the way we've been taught in school, but there seems to have been some outside interference of some sort. What do you say to all that's happening in parallel with these alien abductions?
I have no problem with that, but we're dealing with lesser gods. We're not dealing with a race of beings. If you understand what Scripture's telling us, at the advent of the dispersal of human population at the Tower of Babel, God confused all their languages, and they all dispersed in groups of their own languages that they could communicate with, and they all went to different parts of the earth. Okay? At the same time, God gave these lesser gods, I should say, these were fallen hosts of heaven, an opportunity to redeem themselves. And he gave them territories that they could be responsible for, to bring their territory and their people of that territory back to the true God of the Bible. And the thing is, they didn't do that. They ended up getting their territory of peoples to worship them instead. These beings, superior beings, but the same heavenly host that the Bible talks about, God created, have extreme knowledge and extreme ability to communicate also, and that's where a lot of this information came from. This is why we see similarities around the world in archaeology,
pyramids,
because they all had that same knowledge.
The hieroglyphics they found in the pyramids in Mexico were the same hieroglyphics they found in Egypt. Lots of similarities between those, and the question is,
now
this, so we didn't have the transportation we have.
And but I believe they did have transportation that we just weren't aware of. I think they sailed the seas long before we realized they did. And there's studies that are starting to show that the ability that the Egyptians had was far more than what we thought it was. The thing about the Ancient Aliens show, though, is, I have some really bad issues with that. And what I see the Ancient Aliens show, especially with von Däniken, is you have to understand where von Däniken came from in his research. Erich von Däniken was 17 years old at the time of the end of World War II. He's from Austria. And they were under Nazi occupation. He's not
Austrian. And he was brought up and lived in Switzerland. Yeah.
Oh, Swiss, yes. Yes. And he was understanding of the whole ideology at that time. As he got into archaeology and went to publish his findings in his book Chariots of the Gods, there was a thinking going on for many, 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 many years of archaeologists, and especially from the English archaeologists, that their findings of these megaliths, monoliths, and developed civilizations that are from the past, there was a thinking that was very racist in nature, and it was called the Hamitic theory. And the idea was is when these archaeologists went and found these locations in remote areas, as they looked around at the indigenous people that were there living there, they said, there's no way these people could have built this stuff. So their thinking was, with the Hamitic theory, was at some point there had to have been a white race come through here, far more superior, that had built these in ancient times. Well, here, von Däniken's getting ready to publish his book, and this is moving into the mid-60s, 1960s, and times were changing, especially in America. Racism was an issue, and we were trying to come out of it. And he could not publish his book with that thinking about using the Hamitic theory, okay? Because of racial issues and being, trying to be politically correct and make sales. So the idea was, let's say that no man made this stuff. And that became the idea that this was made by superior beings from somewhere else. Well, the whole concept is we're taking the idea that man isn't good enough to make these things. And that's where I believe it's wrong. Because I do believe that just because we don't have an answer today doesn't mean that we jump to the most crazy conclusion, for that answer. I think it's just, if we don't know something, we just accept the fact we don't have an answer for that yet. You don't jump to extraterrestrials to try and answer something you don't have an answer for. That's not proper science. That's not proper
let me throw
thinking.
This next question into the works. So how do you explain that, mankind has kind of evolved over the years very slowly, up until about the 1830s, 1840s, where we started to develop, the motor car, electricity, aeroplanes, rockets, computers. How come we were, if you was to compare the world in 1830 to the world in 1530, there wasn't much difference. We still traveled by horse and chariot, horse and cart, so to speak. We still used bow and arrows kind of thing. I mean, guns were starting to be developed. And then suddenly, from 1830 up until today, we've had a major shift, even in the last 20, 30 years, with the advent of smartphones and AI and electric cars and whatnot, and now the rockets and Elon Musk saying we're going to go to Mars. How can you explain that we were going at a certain pace and then suddenly we went hockey stick? Well, some people say it's alien intervention.
I don't know why it took. Yeah, I don't believe that. I still think we're trying to take the credit from smart men away from them. I still think that we're not dealing with that. I think that there's a possibility that some people get ideas from maybe an outside source, which, I mean, we hear that through history, that people had it come to them in a dream or something like that. So that is a type of influence. But looking at it from now a third perspective that gives me a better answer for it, there's no problem with me saying that there could be angelic interference. I have no problem saying that. But that's not an extraterrestrial
that date that I
interference.
threw out there, 1830, I mean, we could track back a few more years to 1776, United States of America. People in Europe were moving to America back in the 1830s because they wanted religious freedom. It all started here in England and Germany, where they started to move away from the Catholic Church, the Protestant faith, the Church of England, and all these other movements. And then this new world was discovered, and people were saying, well, you know what, we'll just get on a boat in Liverpool and travel to America, and there we can do what we want. And so all this new religious revival, Christian revival, kind of starts in America, where today there still are a lot of Americans that believe in Jesus Christ. I believe there's like 100 million Americans, one third of America are people that believe in God, that go to church every Sunday. Could it be that this is what's creating that revival and that connection with God, and maybe God saying, well, maybe man's mature now for this new technology, let's reveal it to him? I'm just throwing.
Wow, you hit on a good one. So that takes me to could this be a lot scarier than we thought it was?
Or inspiring. Or inspiring.
Because you're very, yeah. But in a keep in mind, what does God say about it?
Yep.
Okay? If you're looking at this supernatural book called the Bible, which I believe there's nothing more supernatural on this planet in existence. It's got 11,000 verses in it that all relate to future prophecy. 8,000 of those scriptures have been fulfilled 100% in prophecy fulfillment. That's something that is incomprehensible to the human mind to concept. There's still 2,000 plus verses that are still to come to be fulfilled. So if the odds are that we're seeing here that 8,000 have been fulfilled 100%, there's a good opportunity that these next 2,000 are going to be fulfilled also. So people that are thinking that this Bible has been tweaked or changed or whatever too much, it still holds its own. Where no other religious book in existence is based on prophetic information, as the Bible is. There's nothing more supernatural than this book. So if we look at that aspect of it and look at what does God say about this, the one thing that alerted me and to thinking that this is a lot more scarier than we thought is when you get to one of the future prophetic scriptures. It's in the New Testament, the book of 2 Thessalonians, chapter 2. When you look at that information in that chapter, it's talking about a time in history where God is going to send a strong delusion. And the reason for that delusion is to test humanity, because humanity is starting to turn away from God. And he's going to test humanity, and it's going to be a final test. This test will be so powerful that even the elect, the true devout Christians, could be deceived if it were possible. But they won't be deceived because they're grounded in what God says and their faith in the Bible and God. But the test is to test humanity one last time. And I believe that that delusion is what we're seeing this as part of. Because like I said, everybody that gets involved in this phenomenon, it takes their eyes away from the one true God. That's a delusion that I believe is a game changer. Not just a game changer, it's a game stopper. Because if this happens to you, and if this is that strong delusion, which I believe we're seeing, then the outcome is eternal. And the outcome is eternal for your soul. And that's what the Bible talks about. He's given us everything we need to believe in Him. But people still choose the lie. And He's actually sending the lie. He's allowing the demonic entities to perpetrate this delusion in every aspect that they can to deceive humanity. Because everything points to this phenomenon.
So a question.
Yes.
So did we go to the moon? And I want to get into Elon Musk in a minute. So the question is, do you think...
Oh, I believe we did. I believe we did.
So this whole idea that Elon Musk will take us back to the moon and then to Mars and create a colony on Mars and then take us to become an interplanetary species. I mean, what's your take on all that? You think that's something that's coming soon?
Sure.
Or is that another one of these delusions?
I think that it's... No, I think that's something they're actually working on. They're actually planning on doing. I mean, I work for the space program. I work for a different part of the space program, but that one's, has vast goals in itself. And I believe that these are things that they are truly striving for. And the idea behind it all is to, to make for a better humanity. They're not out looking for extraterrestrial life. They're out there to make things on Earth better for
we've
us.
We've been to the moon 6 times. I mean, 6 ships have landed and 12 men have walked on the moon. Why haven't we been back
Sure.
since? And there's lots of theories about that.
There
Theory
wasn't
number
a
one, we
need
never
to.
went. Theory number two, we went and there was
Yeah.
something on there, so we didn't go back again. Theory number three is we ran out of money.
No. And then you got the other one was we just didn't
Yeah.
need to yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots-
That too. we not only ran out of money, we
yeah,
ran out of interest. And the interest is back because it takes interest
Yeah.
before you even can get the money. Okay? Once you have the interest and you can convince the government that the interest is worth it, then the money comes. The idea that going back is not about finding something else that was up there. It's finding something that they know is up there. And that's the minerals. And H3 was a great find, helium-3, because the importance of getting helium-3 back to this planet is because it can be used for cooling of the nuclear reactors. And if we can get our hands on H3 and make nuclear reactors a safer alternative for energy, it's going to drive the cost of energy way
It
down.
also be useful to propel spaceships to Alpha Centauri and these other star systems where we may
Sure.
find other life, or we could just establish a colony.
Yeah.
And start populating the
Well, there'll be colonies because the concept is they can use mining for the minerals and manufacture stuff on Mars. I mean, on the moon, and put it into space from there, because they're not fighting gravity on the. It takes an enormous amount of fuel and energy to be able to get a rocket with a payload off this planet, but it doesn't take hardly any at all to get it off of the moon. So once we get to the moon and we start mining and manufacturing, then we launch from there,
I think,
which is
also
easy and
the advent
cheaper.
of robots and AI will help with that. They're going to be building the Gateway space station, which will be orbiting the moon.
Sure.
And they'll be putting robots on the moon to do a lot of the mining instead of putting men down there, which makes it a lot easier. And if we can extract three and other minerals
Sure.
to help build other ships that can take us, and launch from the moon, as you said, where the gravity is 1/6 of what it is here, then there's a lot more that we can do. So I think we've got interesting
Sure.
times ahead. And of course, and I agree.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
why
this
I'm
whole-
glad to be part
this
of
whole
it.
theory of yours, which I think is really interesting, these Christians being abducted by these aliens, and they're suddenly mentioning Jesus Christ, and the whole vision disappearing. So these are, yeah.
Well, keep in mind,
Go ahead. Yes.
it's not just Christians, non-Christians calling on the name
Yeah,
of
of course.
Jesus Christ. It works for them too, because Jesus says
Everyone's
"Call on me, and I will be there." So it doesn't matter whether you're a believer or exactly. The one thing, the difference about we found in Christians is we found, like I said in the beginning on our hypothesis, yes and no. What we found was they were Christians that professed Christianity by head thinking, and then you had those that built it by heart. And we set it a difference and called it walk the walk or talk the talk. What we found were there were many experiencers, Christians, in the talk the talk realm, where we were not seeing people that were true believers and walking in faith, the walk, that were having these type of experiences. The researchers, when we first started into this, were asking two questions. How do you stop this, and why does it happen to certain people? Well, we found answers to both in our research. We found how you stop it through the name and authority of Jesus Christ. You can terminate it as a life pattern with a relationship with Him. When it came to why does this happen to certain people, there's a lot of theories out there, but the basic theory, the basic answers that we got were from a Christian perspective. One, you ask for it, and people do ask for it. I'll testify, I asked for it. Number two, and I think this is probably the larger group, is people unknowingly opened a door to this experience. And every time we found that there was an occult New Age, paranormal connection, anything that the Bible said, do not mess with, we found these people messing with. In every single case. The third one puzzled us for a while because I didn't have an answer right away. I had to look for it, but I found it. And it still went back to a biblical scripture. The third one, I had adults coming to me and saying, I don't fit those two. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, I've had these experiences since I was a child. So I couldn't have opened that door. I didn't know what it was. I didn't even know about doors, you know. So that puzzled me. So I went back and re-interviewed a lot of those. And I said, I don't want to talk about your experience. I want to talk about what you remember your family life being like. And what I found was every one of those cases, it was the parents that had opened those doors. And Scripture talks about this. Scripture says that the man is the spiritual head of the household. And if that man is not keeping a spiritual covering, a godly covering over his family, then the rest of the family members, including the children, are susceptible to the wiles of the enemy. And this is exactly what we were seeing.
So what can...
So the answers to those we were able to find,
in this
you know.
last category where their father opened a gateway or portal or whatever you call it, what can they do to shut that, to stop these things from happening? Just believe in Jesus and Jesus' name, sort of seal these portals. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay,
sure. And that's the repeatability aspect of this research. You know, there's nothing repeatable in the UFO community, in the UFO research. Nobody says, hey, look at this UFO, and hey, let me show you again. And it comes back. We don't see that. There's nothing. And we don't even see two of anything the same. There's a lot of people making money.
Selling T-shirts and books and sign up to my website, subscribe to it, and $10 a month, we'll give you a webinar on the aliens in Hawaii. That we're trying to stop the fires from happening, you know, and all that kind of stuff that's going on. So yeah, I'm always weary about people that capitalize on this whole thing because, I mean, as you said, if there's something spiritual that's happening out there and it's not good, we shouldn't be charging people for it. I mean, God doesn't charge us for this.
No. No, and that's... Yeah, exactly. And, you know, that's what I started to see was people that were sending me testimonies or writing me and saying, hey, can you help me? I saw these testimonies. Yeah. And I would show them what these other people had done, you know. It wasn't what I could do. It was what God had done for these other people. Yeah. And I said, you know, let's look at these testimonies. And I said, there's no reason this shouldn't work for you. And lo and behold, they come back with a testimony that it had also stopped for them, and their lives had become back to normal. Yeah. You know, peace and sanity and everything had come back. You know, so it's a major life change when people are able to stop this experience. Yeah. You know, compared to what they were dealing with as experiencers.
Below, where you explain, you know, more in detail your research and whatever, and what people can do about getting rid of these so-called bad experiences they may be having. But Joe, it's been very interesting talking to you. Very different perspective to other guests that we've had on the show. And as we are here to take people to infinity and beyond and to open their minds.
Absolutely.
And connect the dots and figure things out for themselves. We hope that you've been giving them food for thought here with what you're saying. And we hope that, you know, those of you that are listening, go and buy a copy of Joe's book, learn more about, you know, all this and what really is happening and what you can do to sort of be free from these so-called aliens. And and we're here to take you to infinity and beyond. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, do so. And thank you, everybody, and we'll see you on the next one.